How's it going? All right, so we're going to be in Romans chapter 13. Let me say something real quick. If he just said New Life Trick or Treat and you got uncomfortable in your spirit, like it's Halloween. Mostly I'm saying this probably just for the benefit of my dad. He's here, he hates Halloween. The goal is not to celebrate the devil. The goal is to co-opt the holiday. So I don't know if you know this, but the date for Christmas, December 25th, was a Druid holiday. The way that Christianity has a history. I said the date, not the story. Y'all got that right? The date for Christmas. The way that we celebrate holidays, the dates we celebrate them on, has a long history of us co-opting other religious holidays and then taking them over. That's just what we're doing. We are colonizing Halloween. That's our goal. All right, everybody got it? So we're gonna give kids candy, but nobody from this church is gonna be dressed up like a zombie. You see what I'm saying? All right, that's the plan. So it's gonna be a good time. Looking forward to that. We're gonna jump into Romans chapter 13. Let me start with some disclaimers, because I got really uncomfortable last service, preached the whole sermon in 10 minutes, and then had to unpack the whole thing over again, and it was terrible for me. I don't know how they liked it. So let me give you disclaimers so that I feel more comfortable and so that you understand where we're headed. The first disclaimer is this. You are gonna walk out of here today, and you are not gonna walk out of here with 3 pretty answers. That's just not the way it's gonna be. Romans chapter 13, we're gonna go through the first, I think it's 8 or 9 verses. Paul talks about essentially submitting to governing authorities. It's a complicated issue, right? And it's one of those times in the Bible where I'm gonna preach on it, but you're just gonna have to use your own personal discernment throughout your life and how to apply it. Does this make sense? So you're not gonna come away with 3 or 4 pretty answers. I'm gonna try to give you some places to judge from. The other thing, the other disclaimer is this one's gonna be weird, but you'll understand once I get into it. I love living in America. Nobody think that I don't by the time we're done with this. Does that make sense? Because we're gonna talk a little bit about politics, and I can get kind of negative, and I try to be negative about everybody, and I don't want everybody to think I hate living here. I love living here. I'm blessed to live here, but I'm also gonna try to give you some perspective. Is that fair enough? So nobody think that I'm a communist who hates this place. All right? Or pick your other political party. And I don't remember what the first disclaimer was now. So there you go. All right, Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. See, now it's already awkward. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Anybody uncomfortable with that idea already? It gets worse. All right. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong, do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This also is why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, taxes. If revenue, revenue. If respect, then respect. And if honor, then honor. This is going to be fun. So let me start by unpacking kind of the background, historical context of the people and the time that Paul's speaking into. And then we'll go from there. Fair enough? So first of all, this is uncomfortable. I'm sure you've already picked out some of the issues that when it comes to application, it can just get messed up, right? But you have to understand who Paul is talking to. So he's speaking into a brand new church. He's speaking, first of all, I mean, they would have felt more discomfort probably than you because they lived, he's writing to the church in Rome, right? He's writing this letter to the church in Rome. So the people who receive this letter and are told to submit to the governing authorities, they live in the city that the emperor of Rome lives in. And his name is Nero. And Nero, we've talked about before in this, he kills Christians for fun. And Paul says, well, God put him there. That's awkward. So you have this end of it, but then you also have the other end of it, which is you have just fairly recent to Paul's time in this. You had the Jewish people that he came from. They rose up against oppressors in the time of the Maccabees, right? And so what happens is the nation of Israel ends up in exile, and then they end up making their way back to Jerusalem. They rebuild the temple, but they end up under the authority of various empires as they move through the Middle East. And during one of those times, this family, the Maccabees, rise up. They lead a rebellion against the empire that's in charge at the time, and it gets crushed. So he is speaking into a people that are prone to rebellion, like war in this sense. Our religion is threatened. We are being persecuted, so we're going to lash out. Does this, you follow me? This also happens again a couple decades later where the Israelites rise up against the Roman Empire. And in that case, the temple gets destroyed all over again. And so he's speaking to people who would have had this in mind. Paul would have been a person who would have had that type of thinking in mind. He was a Pharisee. He was very zealous. The Christianity rose up and he wanted to crush it. So he was there when they martyred Stephen. He was there during things like that. And so Paul would have had this type of mentality, but then he got saved. And Jesus changed the game because it's no longer about a nation. It is about all of us. And so so defending a nation is not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do here is preach the gospel. Does this make sense? And so he's speaking to people who may be prone to rebellion and are also living under harsh persecution. I guess I say all of that to say this. They would have found this just as complicated and more offensive than you do. Right? And so what do you do with it? Because there's so many things that if you read it on face value, you just go, I don't get it. Submit to the governing authorities. Paul wrote this while he was in jail. He's in chains in Ephesus while he's writing this letter. He's in jail for breaking Jewish law. He has used Roman law to appeal to Caesar. He's a jailhouse lawyer right now while he's writing this. So what do you do with it? Okay, all right, so the first thing is this. There's the beginning, let everyone be subject to the governing authority. So I gotta admit, I don't have the best command of all of this, but from what I've unpacked is this. In the Greek, when you see the word subject, submit, things like this, there tends to be two words that get used. One, in its original language, means to submit. It's a matter of order, right? It's the word that's used in Ephesians when speaking about marriage. Husbands, submit to your wives. So it's a matter of order. Somebody has to be in charge here. God is a God of order. Somebody has to be in charge here. Be subject to whoever's in charge here. Does that make sense? And then the other word means obey. The word that Paul's using here is the one that has to do with order. So what he's saying, you could infer, is this: let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. And then he goes through all of these things. And he says, if you do the right thing, do the right thing. Obviously, there are times when the right thing from God's perspective is in conflict with the right thing from the legal perspective. You tracking with me? Now, the way and how harshly Paul says, just do the right thing, means that if we're going to make that judgment call, which Paul obviously did do, and so did Peter. Peter said a similar thing. Submit yourselves to the governing authorities. He said something very similar to that, and he also ended up in jail, right? So if we're going to say, God's law supersedes here, first of all, we should do that with a high level of trepidation. We should really think through it before we do it. We don't get to just flippantly get angry and be like, well, God's right? Like, this is a big deal. Does this make sense? So if you're going to do that, you are still going to be subject to the governing authorities. What he's saying is, or at least what he seems to be saying is, if there is a time when doing the right thing gets you in trouble, you're just going to end up in jail. Don't fight it. That's what he did. He preached the gospel. It landed him in jail. Did he try to break out of the jail? No, there was a time when there was an earthquake and he could have left the jail and he stayed in and talked to the jailer. Did he have a big rebellion? Like did he petition for protests outside of the house he was locked up in? Even in the time where he did end up in that place, he remained subject to the governing authorities. Now you end up with this other question, which is, well, there's two of them. How am I supposed to be okay with a God who puts bad people in charge and then tells me to listen to them? That's a really big question. And then there's the other question that I just forgot because I realized how big the other question was. How am I supposed to be okay with a God that says he puts bad people in charge? Nero is too abstract, right? I can tell you stories about Nero, but you didn't learn, if you did learn about Nero in history class, it was 2 sentences in a history book that you probably didn't read, you know what I mean? All of you read your history books? You're very seriously looking at me right now. All of you read them? Yeah, I didn't think so. So let's just make the turn. The obvious question here is, what do you do with Hitler? What do you do with that? And this would be my answer. The fact that we ask that question means that on some level we are so blessed that we've learned to take God for granted. Follow me down my logic and don't shut me off. We live in a time where things come really easy. And when things go wrong, we find it very hard or very easy to blame God. Now, I'm not saying that your life is easy for you. Whatever the hardest thing you've been through is the hardest thing you've been through. Does that make sense? So if it's the hardest thing you've been through, then it's really hard. So I'm not trying to criticize you. I'm just saying from a historical perspective, our need to see the provision of God is just not the same as it would have been 1,000 years ago. Does that make sense? And so just take this for example. When you sit down to say the blessing in your house, how fervently do you pray and thank God for your food? You probably don't do it that meaningfully. You probably just do it because that's what you're supposed to do. Or you don't do it at all, right? But that's a tradition that comes from a place where if it didn't rain, you didn't eat. God gave you that. So our perspective is just so far away from probably what it should be, which is God provides things in a hard, harsh, terrible world. And so in a world with free will, a man like Hitler will end up in place sometimes. But guess what God did? This was God's provision in that time. Did he allow him to come to power? Yes. Did God use that to his glory in some ways? This is uncomfortable, but yes, think about what happened there. He You have this awful, awful man. But this awful man was in power during the same time as a man named FDR, during the same time as a man named Winston Churchill, during the same time as a man named George Patton, George MacArthur, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Bernard Montgomery. Like I've spent so much time studying this period of history because it's so fascinating to me. And here's why. Because of all of the amazing leaders. In the same time that this evil man rose up and had power, God put in place dozens of other leaders who could lead him into the ground. So how do I deal with the God that allows bad people to be in charge sometimes? I trust him to provide good people to make it better. Right? And so I guess we've kind of answered that question, right? That's the problem with this whole sermon. That's the best answer. We want to have these beautiful, clean, nice answers. I want you to leave here with like 3 pithy sayings that you'll repeat and give me credit for. You know what I'm saying? That was a joke. Please don't think I'm that vain, but you get what I'm saying. Like, that's what church is supposed to be, and this is just messy. Submit to the governing authorities. So, what do we do with that practically? You know, like we live, I mean, you all came to church here without fear of being arrested, right? And matter of fact, we hired a police officer to be here. So we don't have that fear. And so we also live in a country that has a different political system than what he's speaking into, because what he's speaking into it's a dictatorship. It's an empire. This is a democracy. You have a voice, right? And so there's this weird issue for us. Like, okay, like I get it. I'm going to follow the law. And if I ever end up in a place where following the law gets me put in jail, I'm going to be okay with being put in jail. I get it. But like what? That's probably not going to happen to me. How do I apply this here? Because in America, I have a political voice and I feel like I should use my political voice, but then right? And so let me start with this. Titus Chapter 2, Paul, I'll just give you you can look it up. I will explain it to you and then you can look it up. Titus Chapter 2, Paul's speaking to this pastor named Titus, and he's writing to him, and he's got a handful of letters where he does this. He also kind of calls out this same concept in 2 Timothy, and so he's writing to them, and essentially he's a mentor for these guys, and he's trying to teach them how to do the job, and what he says is teach the old men to behave this way, teach the older women to behave this way, teach the young men to behave this way, teach the young women to behave this way, so that your lives will not be detrimental to the gospel. And there's this theme all along the way, and I would actually say that this in Romans chapter 13 goes along with this theme. It's the idea of this: be a good citizen so that your actions will not be counted against you when it comes to your witness. Does that make sense? Literally, Paul is saying, build your life so that your life does not mess up your message. That we can play with. The first point when it comes to how I can apply all of this to my life is this: it's God's job to have the plan. Midterms are coming up. How many of y'all are watching the TV and throwing stuff at it? Bunch of lying people in this room. Maybe you don't watch the TV for the news. How many of y'all are looking at Twitter and retweeting stuff? I mean, that's where a lot of people get their news now. Maybe you're old school, maybe the newspaper. Anybody on the newspaper still? It's God's job to have the plan. So, that means I probably shouldn't freak out about it all the time. You know what else that means? God's in control. So that means that no matter who is in charge of Congress next round, you are just as secure then as you are now. Why? Because God's got the plan. And we just talked about Romans chapter 8 2 weeks ago. He works everything together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. It's God's plan. Like if you spend a whole lot of time like getting worked up over what's going on in the political world, two things are gonna happen to you. Number one is you will be frustrated for no reason because they don't care what you think about. They just care how you vote. And how you vote is not always how you think. It's just not. Because literally it's common every presidential election. They talk super extreme in the primaries and then they get closer to the middle in the general election because they're trying to manipulate your vote. So anyway, and that's on both ends of things. So anyway, point being, they don't really care about what you think. They just want you to vote for them. And not to mention, lately we've been stuck with like two bad choices. So anyway, the other thing that will happen to you is you'll be frustrated for no reason and I said it already. Nothing's really going to change. So that's it. But we let ourselves get worked up on that, right? Maybe you don't, but I would suggest that you probably do. I've had a lot of conversations, a lot of political conversations, and it plays a huge role in our lives. And look, I'm not trying to diminish the importance of it. It is important, and you should vote. And you should vote your conscience. But I am trying to say that like your worrying is not going to change a dang thing. Your anger is not going to change anything. And as a matter of fact, you worrying and getting angry, or you worrying and getting sad, or you worrying and getting frustrated, not only is it not going to change anything big picture, it's going to make you less effective at the one thing you know you're called to do, which is share the love of Jesus Christ with everybody around you. Right? It's God's job to have the plan. He doesn't plan based on your politics. If you're a Democrat, the world did not fall apart when Donald Trump was elected. God was still in charge. And if you're a Republican, the world did not fall apart when Joe Biden was elected. God is still in charge. He doesn't plan based on your politics. I'm going to say something that's going to make everybody a little bit uncomfortable, I think. You do realize that both party platforms contain biblical principles? Like, God is not sitting in heaven wearing his elephant or donkey hat. He's just not. And here's the other thing. The Bible talks about the city on a hill, and that gets used by politicians. America's the great city on the hill, the shining light for the world. Dude, America's not the great city on a hill that's a shining light for the world. The nation that changes everything in this world is not a country. It does not have legal borders. It is a nation of Christ followers that do as he asks and follow him and love him. That's the thing that changes things. That is the shining city on a hill. You are that, but not because you have a U.S. passport, but because you call on the name of Jesus.
That's right. Amen.
See, but I do love America, so nobody try to get me kicked out, all right? He doesn't plan based on your politics. And if this theme that Paul keeps hitting on, don't let the way you act in society get in the way of your witness. The end of what we read in 13, he ends here. This is when you pay taxes for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. And then he makes a turn in verse 8. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. So this theme of spreading the love of Jesus Christ has to be the center of my social engagement. That is what we're built for. That is what we're supposed to do. That is what's most important when it comes to how I relate to other people. He says it in Titus. He says it in 2 Timothy. He says it right here in Romans 13. If that is what he's getting at here, then your job in all of this is not to campaign. Your job in all of this is not to protest. A sign at a protest never hug nobody, and people need hugs in the name of Jesus. Your job is not that. Your job is to let your life preach. And here's the problem. The more you talk about politics with people, the more they don't like you, or the more they like you. It's divisive. It's binary. There are very few people in your life that you can talk politics with and walk away enjoying the experience and disagreeing at the same time. How often do you get in one of those conversations with someone you disagree with and come away going, well, that was edifying for both of us? It's not edifying for both of you. And not only that, it's divisive, and it doesn't change anything. It doesn't fix anything. Well, I convinced them I was right. That's great. Who cares? Talk to your spouse. You'll be wrong in 20 seconds later. I said spouse on purpose, by the way, so nobody call me sexist. Spouse. Y'all got to give me a little bit. You're making me uncomfortable. Even worse. Trying to thread a needle here. Your politics shouldn't pollute your message. Your politics shouldn't pollute your message. Here's the problem. This is the thing that's actually most alarming to me. The politics in our country are getting more and more polarized. They just are. But the church is beginning to do the same thing on political grounds. Right? It doesn't happen here, but there are churches. I listened to a preacher this week called Democrats Demons. But it happens on the other end of things too. These big words get thrown around like all the time, and it's this constant barrage, and the church is beginning to split on political grounds too. And look, it will be the death of us if it continues. It will be the death of us if it continues, not because politics are inherently evil, not because God doesn't care about our country, not because of any of that. It will be the death of us if it continues because we won't have a message. Do you realize how crazy it is when as Christians we allow the gospel to be prostituted out in the service of a political argument or campaign? That is insane. That you take the gospel is this beautiful story about how God sent. First of all, he cared about us so much that he sent his son to die on a cross to absolve us of our sins, so that we could then be reunited with him. That one day we could spend eternity with him in glory. That our lives here on this place don't have to be meaningless and pointless and get us nowhere. That all of this can work and work out for the good not only of God, but for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. That's the gospel, right? And it gets used. And sometimes we applaud it. It gets used to win votes by a politician who doesn't care about you and really only wants your vote and is pitching an idea that will last for a couple of years in a country that is a wonderful country to live in, but will pass away one day. The most abhorrent thing to us should be when our faith, our religion, the thing that should be most dear in how we relate to other people gets used to manipulate us. But somehow, in some places, we're allowing it to become part of our ethic. That can't be the case. It won't have any power in it. It won't change anything. It won't help anybody. So, this is what I would say, practically speaking. I guess you get one decent little takeaway. Let's say it this way. Jesus, no, you know what, let me do this. So my grandma used to own a house down on one of the barrier islands in North Carolina, right? And we would go there on vacation, and every Christmas we'd go and we'd hang out. So like we'd go to the beach when it was cold. It was kind of weird, but basically all you could do was look for shark's teeth. So I became like obsessed and had like tons of little tiny shark's teeth. But anyway, and one really big one that I thought was awesome and worth lots of money, because when you're 8, everything cool is worth lots of money. So we would go down there and visit and everything, and she sold it since, but I learned something when we were down there, and I thought it was crazy. It's a barrier island, so the ocean's on one side of it, and then it's this long strip, and then on the other side of it is the intercoastal waterway, and so it's essentially ocean river, right? And that's the way the island is, and so it's basically the worst place ever to build a house. It's sand. And here's the other thing. There's water on both sides of it, so it moves. The island moves. It is common knowledge that if you build a house on the north end of the island, it'll only be a couple decades before that house is in the ocean, because the island is moving 3 or 4 inches every year to the south. Gives a little bit of a new meaning to Jesus' story. There was a man who built his house on the sand, and the winds came and the rain blew, or the winds came and the rain blew. The rains came and the wind blew and knocked the house down, right? Why? Because it was built on the sand. Then there's another guy who built his house in the mountains, not on the beach, right? But in the mountains, there's lots of rocks. So he built his house on the rock. And because he built his house on the rock, the rain came, the wind blew, and the house was still standing. Why? Because it was built on the rock. See, here's the thing. Here's the thing about today's time. We are so blessed, and we are so far from understanding like just how important this gospel is and how important God's role in our lives is. And we are take him so for granted that we build houses on sand on purpose. If you allow yourself to believe that your politics, your social beliefs, your opinions on what's going on in our country today are in the same even ballpark as the gospel and as what God wants of you and how you're supposed to interact with people when it comes to that, you have built your house on the sand on purpose. Your happiness, your well-being, your comfort, your faith, your joy, your hope is not placed in an election. It is not placed in a country. It is not placed in a constitution. It is not placed in a Declaration of Independence. It is not placed in any of that. It is placed in the Almighty God who sent his Son to die for you so that you could be reunited with him and commune with him. Your life is built on the firm foundation of the gospel, or it should be. And if it's not, fix it. Can I pray with you? God, thank you. First of all, thank you for blessing us to live in this time and place. And thank you for allowing us to live in a time and place where we have to try to get good perspective because we're so blessed we get used to it. We thank you for those things. We don't curse your blessings. We thank you for them. But we also pray that in addition to the blessings, you'd help us have good perspective. And God, we just pray right now that I just pray right now that we would put our faith in you, that we would find hope and joy and contentment and peace in you, no matter what's going on in our world, and that instead of trying to figure out all the ways we can try to change things from the outside in, I pray that we would look at the world and go, wait a minute, forever the case has been the same. It needs to be changed from the inside out. And so, Lord, let us sell out to the gospel, and let us sell out to your word. Let us sell out to your message. And instead of being distracted by all the craziness and the silly stuff, God, let us be sold out for what you're sold out for. Let us talk about that just as much as we talk about all the silly stuff. Let us have the passion for that just as much as we have the passion for the political things we believe. Let us be as active in our faith as we are in everything else that we believe. Let us be more active in our faith than anything else. Let us just do your work and be happy doing it.